All right, how's it going, everyone? We've got Ross Alexander here today. Ross is the assistant coach at Division One Arizona State, originally from Scotland. How's it going, Ross?
Morning, Darren. Thanks for having me on. Doing well. Beautiful day in Arizona.
Yeah, can't complain. All right, just to get started, Ross, just a little bit about yourself. Obviously, originally from Scotland, spent some time at Falkirk, and then we actually met over here in Arizona. So just if you want to kind of give your little experience on coming out to the States and what brought you out here.
Yeah, for sure. I so obviously grew up as you mentioned there. I played with Falkirk. I played local boys club, like a lot of people I'm sure that you'll speak to do. Then signed for Falkirk when I was 10 or 11, I think. And I was at Falkirk for 6.5 years. I left Falkirk at 17. I was released at that point. And then I spent a year full time at St Johnstone, which is a different experience, staying in digs and stuff up there in the SPL at the time, which was a good experience, a good learning experience for me. I was released again, and I went to Stirling Albion in the Championship at the time. And at that moment, my coach at Stirling Albion is obviously a part-time club. My coach's full-time job was as a recruiting agency, trying to help players, go to America if that's what they wanted to do. And he asked me if that was something I'd be interested in. And to be honest with you, at the time, it wasn't. I had no interest in it at all. I'd lived in Perth for a year. I'd just moved back to Falkirk. I was really happy in Falkirk, very comfortable in Falkirk, and I was quite happy just to stay there and get on with my life. The problem with that is I was working a job that I wasn't really enjoying, and I was sort of stuck in it. And this opportunity, it was my dad, to be honest, was like, look, you should probably look at pursuing this opportunity if you think it's going to be a good fit, and blah, 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 blah. So I just read a little bit more into it, looked a little bit more into it, reached out to some schools. They obviously got back to me, sent videos, all the rest of it. And I ended up at Grandview in Des Moines, Iowa, NAIA school. And to be honest with you, it's probably the best thing I ever did. The 4 years play, I spent 4 years playing there, a couple of years as a grad assistant, but it was the best time in my life for sure. I think again for any young people here, I think that moment where it was uncomfortable for me to do that because it was an unknown and something that I hadn't really thought of. I was very comfortable in Falkirk, but taking that sort of unknown leap has changed my life. So I ended up in Des Moines, Iowa. Spent 6 years there. 4 years playing and 2 years as a grad assistant at Grandview on the men's team. And then I got offered a job with Phoenix Rising in Arizona, moved there, and I've been here 5 years now. During that time, I spent 3 years as a volunteer assistant at Arizona State, and then just completed my first fall season as a full-time assistant. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, perfect. That's a good kind of overview, introduction. Obviously, some of the points you mentioned we'll dive deeper into later on, but our paths are pretty similar. I feel like I obviously spent some time at Motherwell, and then dropped out to that part-time level at Alloa, and I think a lot of players, they see the opportunity to go play pro back home, but when you're at that Alloa level and maybe part-time Stirling Albion, you compare the opportunities out here in the US, you're training 5-6 times a week compared to there where you maybe make, £50 a week expenses, and then, you're only training twice a week. What would you kind of tell those players that are on that verge right now, like your experience in America compared to what it would have been if you stayed back in the UK?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think, and it's something I think of a lot, like the sort of what if I'd stayed home? What if I, even after I graduated, what if I went home? Like, what would I be doing with my life? And to be honest with you, I wouldn't be doing anywhere near what I would be doing right now, so I wouldn't probably most likely not be happy in the job that I'm doing. Yeah. Just, trying to make ends meet and get on my life. But I've been extremely fortunate that by coming to America originally as the first step has opened up so many doors. The country as a whole, America, you'll know this yourself, but the people here are very proactive in that sense. So that, you talk about the American dream per se, but that's what people are trying to do. They're trying to create opportunities for themselves and trying to find opportunities for themselves. And that sort of culture environment, I think, is very welcoming to people that are willing to work hard and have a drive to go succeed. And it's a lot easier to get that than staying home in Scotland or the UK, I believe.
Yeah, definitely. The opportunities, I mean, we'll touch on it later again, but even what you're doing now, there's kind of nothing comparable back in the UK. So going back to Grandview, kind of give us a little insight on your 4 years there. Obviously, you came from Falkirk to Iowa, which was probably pretty eye-opening. It's not kind of the America you see on tourist boards and stuff like that. So give us kind of some insight into your time at Iowa and Grandview.
Yeah, so I think I'll start with as a sort of why I chose Grandview, because obviously there's a couple offers or whatever, but Grandview, so NAIA school. But the thing I loved about Grandview at the time was it was a winning program, which was cool to me. Not the be all and end all by any means, but it was cool to me. I think the season before I got there, I think they were like 18-2 or something like that. So yeah, very good. But also added to that factor was they had a team full of internationals, which was cool. Which for two factors, the first piece is there was, I think, 4 or 5 British guys there.
Okay.
For me, that had moved away from home before, having to move away from home again, I think that was a sense of comfortability, sort of what I spoke about earlier on. There was a comfortability there that I knew that I'm going into people that would be somewhat similar to myself or have a somewhat similar background. But then also the flip side of that is, there was Polish players, there was Brazilian players, there was German players, there was Dutch players, the Italian players, and I was going to get to meet and mingle with players from all different backgrounds, from all different cultures, and you can't underestimate the learning and growth aspect of that as a player, and now as a coach looking back, like, wow, that was really good for my development. But Grandview, again, the coach, Blair Reid, he's just retired last year. He was phenomenal with me from day one. Made me feel at home, which is, again, for players that are going to come out here, you're going to get homesick at some point. You're 19, 18, 19, 20, however old you may be. Like, you're going to miss your home at some point. You're going to miss birthday parties. All your mates are going to go, going to be out. They're going to be on holiday somewhere, and you're going to miss it. But you're going to be able to do so many things that they might never see and might never do. So I'll be forever grateful for Grandview for that opportunity. Being able to play, to your point, train every day, we play twice a week, Wednesday, Saturday, it's full on. The games under the lights, it's like a real community feel about it. The school, it's a small school, but everybody in there is all about the school, and you sort of know everyone, and they come to the games and watch you, and yeah, you feel sort of in your own little bubble world, but you feel on top of the world, if that makes sense. So it's a really cool experience.
Yeah, no, definitely, and that was similar to my experience. The school I went to, obviously, as you know, is kind of same level as Grandview, same size, similar area in the country. So going back, NAIA, obviously that's what Grandview and William Woods, where I played, is, and we have conversations a lot with players about what level they could potentially play at before they come out, what we're potentially going to recruit for them. So what would you say like that level's like, maybe compared to back home, compared to other Division 2 schools? Because Grandview and William Woods, when I was there, were both nationally ranked, both a very high standard. So I think some people see NAIA and they think, oh, the standard's not going to be great. Can you give us kind of your insight into that?
Yeah, no, I mean, very good, very good. And as I was mentioned, the players on the team, when I got there, different nationalities and whatnot, but like the Scottish players that were there before me, one was in the first team at Livingston, one was playing first team at Annan Athletic, one was at Dunfermline, one had been playing for Airdrie in the youth team. So again, it's all players that are playing at what you would consider a good youth level in Scotland, and then come to the States. And then when they got there, it's not easy, because you're playing against players again from all over the world that have played at a similar level, and the standard's very high, extremely competitive, no easy games, and the standard's great, and for the players that you're looking to help, then you can't go wrong with it, to be honest.
Yeah, no, definitely. I feel like it's always kind of underestimated. So I like whenever we do these calls, getting someone else's perspective of it. So it's just not coming from myself every time. So going back, we kind of mentioned opportunities once you're in the US. So obviously you come over, you get your bachelor's degree, and there's tons of coaching opportunities, there's tons of work opportunities. So you took the opportunity at Grandview to go on and be a graduate assistant. So maybe a lot of our listeners here won't really know what a graduate assistant is. Can you kind of give an overview on that, what that meant for your studies, your living accommodation, kind of a brief overview on the graduate assistant role and what that contained?
Yeah, no, a good question again. So the way it works, again, for the listeners, the way it works is you get 4 years worth of eligibility where you can play soccer for 4 years and get your degree. Then at the end of that, after you complete that, you're allowed to do a 1 year work visa. It's called an OPT. And at that point, just to cycle back a little bit, when I graduated, my first goal was to go home and play. So I went home. I finished the season off with Bo'ness Juniors. And my plan was to finish the season because the school finishes in April. So I was Bo'ness with like April, May, and then try and get a club, in the Scottish leagues, for pre-season. So I did April, May, and to be honest with you, the wind was blowing, the rain was coming down sideways. It was the grass was up to your knees. I was like, I don't know about this. But in the meantime, I had a sort of job lined up in Texas, coaching summer camps.
Okay.
So I sort of jumped at the chance to get back to that. So I did that, and that started my 1 year work visa. And through that 1 year work visa, what I did was I went back to Iowa and I started coaching club soccer there with Sport in Iowa. But also I volunteered at Grandview as a volunteer assistant. So that year came and I was thinking to myself, like, look, I really want to stay in America now and start a life here, So the way to do that was to go back to school and do a master's degree. And Grandview at the time didn't have a grad assistant, and they actually not created one for me, but I was the first recipient of that.
Okay.
Which was cool, which allowed me so they paid for the schooling, and you got like a little stipend or whatever to help with your living costs. And it allowed me to be, an assistant coach of the team. There was the head coach, they had a full-time assistant, and then me as the grad assistant, which, again, as you're starting there, I was doing a lot of the sort of busy work, I guess, like the run around work, the picking up cones and just trying to learn as much as possible. Maybe I was taking warm-ups and, just sort of getting my foot into the coaching lens. And it's something that as a player, I'd always wanted to do eventually, was to get into coaching. So having that opportunity to do that and combine that with getting a master's degree for free, it seems incredible to think about, but that was the reality. So it was cool.
Yeah, no, and I think, a lot of boys kind of find themselves on that path once they come out here. Maybe they've done their early touches, badges back home, something like that. They get out here, the university that they might be at has a graduate assistant. They see the role and it's something that they quite fancy because, there's nowhere really back home that you could do a role like that where you're studying, you're getting your master's, but you're also a full-time coach, and then opportunities in the future, what you've now taken up, or a full-time professional environment coach, and you don't really necessarily see that back home.
No, not at all. Yeah, you spot on. I did my early touches and stuff in Falkirk, and again, it was always in the back of my mind. But then the opportunity arose, and yeah, it was perfect. Again, you're so fortunate that these opportunities are available and to be able to take them.
Yeah. So after Grandview, obviously you moved down here to Arizona, and that's where we kind of connected at Phoenix Rising. Going back to the OPT, I use my OPT to coach, so very similar to yourself. So kind of, do you want to give us a little insight into your time at Rising and maybe how that led to where you're at now?
Yeah, Rising was great for me as well. Again, talking of like moving from Scotland to Iowa, how much of a uncomfortability level there was for me in doing that. This time around, I'd been in Iowa for 6 years and I loved it. I totally loved it. And in an ideal world, I maybe wouldn't have left. I loved my time up there. I loved the people up there. I go back often. There's a good like Scottish community of people that I know that go at Grandview, and we're all pretty close. So there's some wonderful people up there. But an opportunity again from at this point, I'd been coaching for a little bit, and then you start to get into it a little bit, and then you start to your ambition drives you to a certain extent. And a job offer came up to work in the ECNL boys program at Phoenix Rising, which again to listeners that don't know, it was as a high level of youth soccer in America.
Yeah.
And we didn't have that in Iowa at the time, so we were sort of stuck. It's a smaller state, whereas Phoenix is a massive city, and so those opportunities weren't available. And that's an opportunity for me to help my career grow and develop that I wanted. So I managed to apply, and I came down, interviewed, and got the job. And then I spent 4 years full time at Phoenix Rising, where I was the boys coaching boys ECNL. Then I was a boys ECNL director. And then latterly coaching the MLS Next boys team. So terrific experience, a terrific amount of growth that I did. Again, looking back in that time when you're in it, you don't realise it, but during that time span, I grew tremendously as a coach and as a man, trying to work my way around life. But loved it.
Yeah, talking on ECNL and MLS Next, just for our listeners, I think it is important to maybe note that because. Obviously we work with boys from the UK, boys and girls from the UK to bring them over, but there's so much competition already here in the US for these spots. So, your MLS Next and your ECNL, the standard, as you mentioned, is very high. What would you say MLS Next is pretty similar to academies back home?
Yeah, for sure.
So
on the boys, yeah, for sure.
So I feel like that's also something. I'm glad you mentioned it because players watching this will be able to see, I'm competing for these spots with kids already in America who are in a very professional environment, kids who are in Brazil, like you mentioned, Poland, like you mentioned. So I'm glad you mentioned that. That would be good to have in there.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's again being from Scotland and growing up in Scotland and pro youth and the rest of it, and again, when you're in that world, you think like that is the world, and you think that's the top of the top. And then when you come to like America, just the sheer scope and the size, of these organizations, MLS Next, ECNL, Girls Academy, like they're massive. You go out in these fields and you're talking to complexes that have 25 fields going, and they're just packed all day with games going on. And yeah, there's just and teams playing. We were in a ECNL event in Florida last weekend, and you've got a team from New Jersey playing against a team from Dallas, and you got a team from Washington, Seattle, Washington playing against a team from Florida, and it's just, again, to compare that to back home, that's like playing a team from Scotland against a team from Russia, almost, which is weird to think about, but that's the scope of it.
Yeah, no, it's huge, and I mean, I'm glad we touched on it just to kind of provide some insight. So kind of moving on. You mentioned an ECNL event you were at last week. So now you're at Arizona State. Women's program, obviously a big Division I school out here in the US, very well known. Big football program, big university in general. Pac-12. Can you give us kind of some overview and insight into your time at Arizona State so far?
Yeah, I mean, again, extremely grateful for the opportunities that I've been provided at Arizona State. Again, that in the path that's got me there, and the people that I've met along the way and work with now, it's truly, it's totally humbling. But yeah, great school, great location, great facilities are unbelievable. Again, just to give you some context on that, we had so. In the summer, they do a lot of friendlies and stuff. In Uruguay, we're playing Mexico in Phoenix in the summer. And Uruguay used our facilities to train for the week. So it's top range stuff. Yeah, the school as a whole is great. The level was fantastic. It was the NWSL draft yesterday. We had a girl, get drafted, and it's now going into the pros. So again, just to give you guys a gauge of where it's at, we had a girl as well last week that signed for Bayer Leverkusen in the Bundesliga. So yeah, it's a top level. We've got players that are likely to be going to the World Cup next year, the Women's World Cup, playing in the World Cup in New Zealand, which again, incredible. But getting to work with that level player every day, getting to work with the level of staff that we have every day is phenomenal. Yeah, it's truly it's a really great job for sure.
Yeah, and fair play to yourself, because obviously you mentioned earlier, you're now an assistant, but you started there as a volunteer, so you were given, kind of up your time and basically showed your worth and ended up getting a full-time position out of it. So, I think you got to credit yourself a little bit for that, putting in the work beforehand and then coming on full-time.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I think, it's like anything new, and I said this, I guess, at the start when we were talking American Dream, all that stuff, but if you're willing to put in the work and put in the time and put in the effort, hopefully good things come your way. And it doesn't always happen. I could have volunteered for 6 years and maybe never got an assistant job, and that's a reality as well. But I knew that going into it, and that is and even when I went into it as a volunteer, like it wasn't I want to, as soon as a job opens up here, I want to be an assistant. It wasn't really like that. I wanted to learn. I wanted to grow. I wanted to, again, because I'd been at Grandview as a grad assistant, and then I was working at Phoenix Rising in the college game. I did want to have a connection to the college game just in case, I wanted to try and take my career in that direction. And again, thankful to Graham Winkworth and Arizona State for opening their doors to me, because they didn't have to do that either,
Yeah, no.
People that want to go and volunteer, so they were extremely great with me as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. And even if you didn't get a position there, I'm sure that experience would have opened other doors, which is probably your thinking. So obviously you've coached at the Division 1 level, you've coached at the NAIA level. So us as an agency, we help players come over, and a big portion of that is recruitment from coaches. So can you kind of give us a little insight into the NAIA recruitment process, what maybe you're looking for, and then the Division 1 process, what maybe you're looking for? Because we, as an agency, we try and be open and honest and upfront with players, so we'll kind of give them an overview of where they could potentially play, and a lot of players have their sights on Division 1, but obviously that's not the case for everyone. So if we start off with the NAIA, maybe give us some insight into that, and then we can move on.
Yeah, for sure. NAIA, I think the big difference in the recruiting is budgetary. So for NAIA coaches, they're not able to get out to all these showcases all over America and see all these players. So when we were recruiting at Grandview, a lot of it was either local kids or regional, like sort of Midwest kids that we thought were good, or international, because that doesn't really, all that it costs to recruit internationally is time and effort. You have to reach out to people like yourself, and you have to get the videos from the players and have to try and watch them. Now there's a risk involved with that as well. I think to relate back to your players, like not being able to see a person live, right, makes the recruiting process more difficult. But a lot of NAIA schools will recruit internationally because they can't get to every showcase here, there, and everywhere in America. But they can get some really, really top players internationally, which I think in essence then drives up the level of NAIA because of that. I think that would be, and the stuff as well, like the videos and stuff. I would say on your videos, the highlight videos, I would say make sure that they're not like super long. You're talking maybe 3-4 minutes max, because again, as a coach, you've got to watch like hundreds and hundreds of them, so you don't want to be there all day. And then I think it would be good if the players had access to a full game as well, because what we would do is you'd watch the highlight video, have a look at the player's profile, where they are, what they're doing, and watch the highlight video. And if that sort of sparks an interest, then it would be like, hey, can we watch a full game and really get to know the player a little bit? And then from that, it's just trying to create the relationship, and this goes both ways. So with the players that you're working with, like, it's important that they have a feeling for the coach that they're going to be with, for the place that they're going to go. Have a look. I would encourage them to do their research.
Yep.
You know, on what's the town like, what's how far away from the airport is it? You know, what's that like? What's the accommodation like? Where they're going to be living? And really, what the relationship with their coach is like. And we do the same thing, vice versa now on the coaching side, like with the players that we meet with, that we do, you know, Zoom calls with or whatever, like. Who are they as a person? Because that's what you're working. You're going to be with that person for 4 years, hopefully. So they've got to be a right fit for the school from a soccer standpoint, but also from a character standpoint.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I like the mentioning like international players at NAIA, because I think that is a lot more common. You know, obviously there's a different governing body, so there's different rules and regulations, and we see, you know, a lot of players getting those offers. So definitely appreciate your insight from a coach. And then if we can just kind of touch on the Division 1, kind of setting expectations for players potentially coming out, what the level's like, just so we as an agency can be honest and kind of set standards.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, like at the Division 1 level now on the women's side with Arizona State, it's extremely high. Extremely high. So and we want to try and compete. So we play in the Pac-12, and the national champions for Division 1 are UCLA, who are also in the Pac-12.
Yeah,
they actually didn't even win the Pac-12. They came second in the Pac-12, but they're national champions. So that's the sort of level that we're at. And their teams are full of US international players. Again, US national team is arguably the best in the world, if not, you know, one of the top 5 every year for sure. And they've got players that are on these national teams, or youth national teams. So we, you know, as a school, we're trying to compete with that. We want to get there. If we're being honest, it's not going to happen overnight for sure. But our goal long term is to go and compete for these titles one day. So in order to do that, we have to get players that, you know, are as good as what they're bringing in. So we have to, you know, find at the top of the top, and that for us is scouring the whole world, wherever they may be, and try to find them. Whether they're on our doorstep in Phoenix, we'd love to have the best players in Phoenix if they're good enough for sure. That's a big part of what we're trying to do. But also, you know, all over the world, wherever they may be, should they be good enough, and we're able to create that connection with them and feel like they'll be a good fit for us character-wise, then yeah, that's important.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think kind of we got that recruiting aspect covered from the NAIA to Division 1. One thing just to touch on, obviously academics is a huge thing out here. You know, your grade point average, which for those back home is what grades you're getting in your classes, accumulative. So can you kind of touch on that as well from a recruiting aspect? You know, obviously coaches are looking at that. You're a student before you're an athlete. So give us kind of your overview or your intake on that.
Yeah, I'll give you just a personal opinion on that. And this has changed, I guess, as I've gotten older a little bit as well. But I never, again, when I was at high school in Scotland, I never really enjoyed or saw the value in school. If I'm being totally honest. But now reflecting back, and when I went to college, I did extremely well. You know, like all the lists and whatever, academic lists and all the rest of it. But I think now, from a recruiting standpoint, and when I'm looking at players and stuff, I think it's a reflection of who you are as a person to a certain point as well. And school's not for everyone. I get that, and some people struggle more than I totally get that. But the effort is what you can't lack. And if I see somebody's GPA, and it tells me a little bit about the personality of that player, that person, and the desire that they have to, you know, do as well as they can in the classroom. Again, that's totally personal. That's not an Arizona State thing by any means. It's a totally personal mindset of how we're looking at GPA. You are a student athlete, and you're a student first and foremost. You're coming here, you're going to get a degree, which is amazing, and you get the benefits of being an athlete on top of that, which is massive. You know, if you're an athlete at these schools, you get first options to everything. You know, you're looked at, you know, like a god when you're a student athlete. So you get exposure to so many things, but it's because you're a student and you have to maintain that. And again, totally personal preference, but you often see a reflection on a person's GPA either improving or not improving, going the opposite way, and their performance on the field. I think it's there is a correlation there for sure, because I think it's a mindset. I think it's a desire, a dedication. If you're going to do well in every part of your life, and that's important.
Yeah, no, and I was kind of similar to you. Obviously, our paths are pretty similar. Where we played back home, both came over, done the OPT, done the CPT, all that kind of stuff. And I was the same. High school maybe necessarily wasn't for me. I still put the work in. I still got grades. But when I came out here, my GPA at undergrad was better than high school. And then my GPA for masters, I think I got always 1A minus. So I think once you're out here and you're studying something you enjoy, and it's something you want to go into maybe after, if football doesn't work out, soccer doesn't work out, then it's definitely smart to invest time, invest effort, and keep that GPA high. And even going back to yourself as a graduate assistant, to take roles like that, maybe after you're playing, you got to maintain that GPA, one, to get into the master's program that you'll be studying, and two, as a representation of the school, of the coaches, leading the way for your players. So I definitely think it's a pretty important factor when you're out here.
No, definitely, and you made a good point there. And again, you're doing a master's while you're being a coach as well. So there's a workload piece there, and you have to acknowledge that, and you have to appreciate that. You can't be scared of it, or you can't make excuses for it. You know what you're signing up for. If you want to be a student athlete, and that's not to scare people, because I firmly believe that the Scottish education system is actually very good, and very difficult. High school is difficult in Scotland, and then American college, again, going back to the mindset piece, I believe a lot of American college is founded on, your ability to work, and your desire to work. Because if you want to put the work in here, you'll be successful. And if you're not willing to do that, then that's when you're going to come to difficulty. But yeah, for sure.
No, academics is obviously a huge factor out here. As we mentioned, you're a student athlete, not an athlete student. So, Ross, overview today's been absolutely brilliant. I think you've gave people insight into Division 1 level, the opportunities out here for boys who are maybe interested in coaching and stuff. So, really appreciate your time and your insight today.
No, anytime. Thank you for having me, and best of luck to all the young student athletes out there.